All right, guys, welcome back to No Casuals. I'm here with Luke. As always, I'm Aiden. We're very excited to give you quick picks. This is going to be a little bit shorter than our normal episodes, but the way it works is we'll just go through the card, talk about some under the radar fights, talk about the big fights, give you all you want to know about UFC 310 this Saturday in Las Vegas. How do you feel, Luke?
I'm pumped, man. I'm ready.
Me too, man. It's gonna
No
be.
UFC last week has me really amped, and I'm
I
ready
know.
for
I'm
it.
like. I feel like I'm addicted to UFC. I'm like scratching my neck.
Yeah,
My skin's falling off. My teeth are falling out. I gotta get that combat sports back in my life. So I'm excited
yeah.
for this Saturday. So let's just go top to bottom on some of these main card fights really quick. Let's talk about Kai Sakura and Alexandre Pantoja. We had a little bit of time to chew on it since last week. How do you feel about this fight?
Yeah, I think we've talked about this fight a lot, especially on the podcast, and you know how I feel, but this time around I'm going with Pantoja, just locking that in. I think that Asakura is probably the most technical, not powerful, but probably the most technical striker that Pantoja has fought. And if he wants to win, he has to stop the takedown. Like it's gonna be a struggle for him. I don't think he can do it. I think Pantoja is going to just continuously seek opportunities to shoot. We know that he has good defense on his feet. So I don't think it'll be an option for him to be outstriked. So I see Pantoja winning, and I honestly see that the odds might be a little closer than they should be. Maybe the UFC kind of wants to make this fight seem like more of an interesting fight than it might be since it's headlining. And I'm definitely gonna put Pantoja in the parlay.
Yeah, man. I mean, I think this is kind of a not a tough fight to score. I think it goes one of two ways. I think Asakura either flattens Pantoja because Asakura's an explosive guy. All these rising guys that come out and they're crazy, like Yuri and Manel Kape, they're all insane. But Pantoja is way too technical, way too patient to fall victim to some craziness. I mean, he's been in there with Figueiredo, he's been in there with Moreno, he's been in there with crazy guys, Royval, and he's beaten all of them handily. I think this ends quickly. I think this ends by a quick submission. I think Pantoja gets him down in the first round and maybe taps him out in the second. And I think Pantoja needs this because he's not even ranked in the top 10 pound for pound, which I think is ridiculous. I think what he's going to do is he's going to make a statement. And he's going to show how he's one of the best in the world.
We're in agreement.
We usually are in agreement. I gotta get a different. We gotta get a third guy in here. Usually it's Ted that says something crazy. We don't have Ted this week. We'll have him for the goat conversation. But let's move to the co-main event: Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Ian Gary. We've talked about this a little bit last week, but with a little bit more time as your opinion changed, you still think Shavkat's gonna get it done? You think it's gonna be finished? What do you think?
Yeah, nothing's changed. I completely think Shavkat's gonna get done and by a finish. He's only won by finishes. He'll do it again. And this fight is so exciting. I mean, having it be, these two guys who are both undefeated, both really, really dangerous and stylistically kind of similar. It's gonna be interesting. I think that Ian Gary might be a better boxer. So if that's an issue for Shavkat, we'll see. I mean, he made really easy work of arguably one of the best strikers, Wonder Boy, and it's just like I really think that he's gonna do the same thing here, kind of shut him down, probably bring him to the ground, but it's not gonna be as one-sided as people might think. I think this is gonna be a close fight, and I think Shavkat will probably win by submission in one of the later rounds. And just overall, I mean, like without looking at really like the stats and everything, Shavkat's just a scary guy. We all know the accusations against Ian Gary, and me personally, I don't take him seriously.
Like here's the thing. I think Ian Gary's striking is some of the most overrated striking we've ever seen. Now he's knocked out guys that had never been knocked out, like Daniel Rodriguez, but you look at him technically, and he wasn't a better striker than Michael Venom Page. He was barely a better striker than Gabe Green, who's an underrated guy, right? I think his grappling is underrated, actually. He was able to wrestle MVP, which a lot of high-level jiu-jitsu players have not been able to do. I think he's a talented mixed martial artist, and I mean mixed martial artist. He mixes the arts well. However, I find that Shavkat is probably better in pure boxing. I think he's a better submission artist, and I think the kicking game is competitive between the two. So look, here's what I'll say. I say that Shavkat will probably hurt Ian Gary in the feet and shoot a takedown while Gary's somewhat wobbled, something like we saw against Bobby Green and Paddy Pimblett. And from there it'll be game over. Because once it hits the ground, I don't think it'll be very competitive. I think Ian Gary's only strength is his ability to stall wrestle on top. He can stall wrestle on bottom too, but I don't think Shavkat's going to play nicely without the elbows and the 12 to 6 is being allowed. So I can see Shavkat winning really by any way he wants. However, that doesn't mean that Gary is a walk in the park. Gary is the toughest fight Rakhmonov has ever had. I see this going into deep water. I think Gary's going to start to drown over as time progresses. I think he's going to get caught, like Jeff Neal did, like everybody that's ever been against Shavkat Rakhmonov has. And I think he's going to get finished. Let's move on to our third fight of the night. Cyril Gane and Alexander Volkov. The big boys are banging. No Diddy. Let's see what's going on, Luke. Who do you got in that one?
I got Gain, and it's gonna be it's such an exciting fight. I mean, their second matchup. I think he's such an ex impressive striker, especially for heavyweight. He's so fast. Reminds me of Aspinall, or Aspinall reminds me of him. But both so explosive. I think that he's gonna probably outstrike Volkov. But most importantly, I think the winner of this has to fight the winner of Aspinall versus Jones. That, and we know that that's probably in the works based off a comment that Dana made, and that just makes me more even excited.
Yeah, man, I disagree with you actually. I think Volkov's going to win this fight. Volkov lost the first one pretty decisively, and Gane's clearly the more pure striker, but Volkov is leveled up. I mean, he outstruck Sergey Pavlovich in his last fight and was able to out-wrestle multiple opponents he's come up against. I think this is going to be an interesting fight, and I'll tell you what. Cyril Gane beat Volkov last time, but we know Volkov is the best he's ever been right now. We know that. He's won four in a row against elite competition. Ever since losing to Aspinall, he's beaten the next four guys they've given him, and all in decisive fashion. However, Cyril Gane has not fought since he lost to John Jones, who, little preview for next week, is one of the greatest fighters of all time. I don't think that's a hot take. I think we can both agree on that one before we even start next week's episode.
Yeah.
However, what I will say is that Cyril Gane has needed to level up. I mean, that loss to Jones was flat out embarrassing. The loss to Ngannou was embarrassing. He needs to level up, and I know that he can, but the question is if he will. And we'll see that on Saturday night against Alexander Volkov. However, if we see the same Cyril Gane that went against John Jones, which I think we might, I think Alexander Volkov is going to be able to get a decision by mixing the wrestling and the takedowns with his elite striking.
Yeah, and he hasn't fought for a while, so it'll be interesting to see if he can shake the cobwebs off. I think we'll be able to tell pretty quickly, in the first couple rounds how that fight's gonna go.
And I think it's kind of ridiculous that Volkov is plus 270 right now, by the way, in Vegas.
Yeah,
It's
that is
a much,
crazy.
much closer fight from the odds. So if you're betting at
There's a
home,
couple fights like that on this card, This is
yeah,
a good betting card, some good underdog.
another plus 270 underdog, Aljamain Sterling, former
There you
bantamweight
go.
champion, in my opinion, the greatest bantamweight to ever touch the octagon, starting off against the undefeated Movsar Evloev. I'm going to go ahead on that one. I think Aljamain Sterling is a better fighter than Movsar Evloev everywhere. Um, Movsar is great. He has great wins against Arnold Allen. It's an incredibly underrated win, but we're talking about a guy that has wins over Piotr Jan, Henry Cejudo, a guy who has win over TJ Dillashaw, a guy who's 13 of his 15 UFC fights, if I remember correctly, have been against ranked opponents. Against a guy who is a great prospect, but admittedly a prospect. I've got Aljamain winning, probably by a decision. I think Evloev's wrestling is good enough to keep him alive on the ground. His striking is good enough to actually, I think, beat Aljamain on the feet. But I think that the mixing it up and the unorthodox striking and the weird submission skills of Aljamain are gonna get it done for him. What do you think, Luke?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in agreement with you. This is not as many people say that this might be more interesting if we had heated debates, but I mean, great minds think alike, and I really think that Aljo is just gonna he may struggle to take Evlov to the ground because I mean, he's really good and strong in that area, but Evlov is, undefeated, but his last few fights have been really close, and I think that he gets his first loss here, even though he didn't in some of those questionable last few decisions where I kind of had him losing, but he has only had decisions in the UFC. He's not as aggressive as Aljo. I feel like Aljo is going to go out there, he's going to try and seek a submission, and it's going to be close, don't get me wrong, but I'm riding with Aljo, and I'm also going to add him to the parlay because he's plus 270. Like, that doesn't make sense for me. There's a couple, like I've said, like, there's a lot of good opportunities on this card. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Yeah, I'm completely in agreement with that. Let's talk about a fight that's on the prelims. Anthony Smith, the trusted gutsy veteran, against the former title challenger, both former title challengers actually, and Dominic Reyes, who had one of the closest fights we've ever seen against John Jones. How do you think that fight goes? Neither of them look to be in their prime anymore, but this should be a really fun fight.
Yeah, neither of them look to be in their prime, but Reyes looked amazing in his last fight. And I think I've expressed my opinion on his fight against Jones and how I think that he beat Jones.
I agree.
And he looks good again. And I think he's going to take this momentum and maybe win by a decision. Smith, I think, is slower than he used to be. So we'll see what happens. I think Reyes will get it done.
And I know we like to say great minds think alike, but sometimes great minds think differently. I think Anthony Smith, he's a guy that's so durable, so tested. We know that he can hang with the best guys in the division. We know that he has. The guys that finish him are guys like Khalil Roundtree that are like completely elite Muay Thai strikers. I don't see Dominic Reyes as being that guy anymore. I think in his prime, Reyes would have handily beat Smith. I think that now it's a much more competitive fight. I think this is a very close fight down the line. But I would actually go for Smith. I wouldn't bet on this fight at all, even with Smith at heavy plus money right now,
Yeah.
because there's so many factors here. You don't know the state that Reyes is in. Dustin Jacoby's a very good fighter, and he was finished in the first round by Reyes in their last outing. Smith lost to Roman Dolidze, who's also a very good fighter by unanimous decision. But if I'm the only bet I'm taking is the over on 1.5 rounds, because this fight is not getting stopped by the judges anytime soon. Even with Reyes coming out strong like he did against Jacoby, Smith's going to be much harder to put away. Let's move on to our last preview fight before we go to our under the radar segment. Vicente Luque is fighting Zimbabwe's Temba Garimbo. Now, for those of you at home, Temba Garimbo, this is his first, I believe, his first pay-per-view event. I think it might be his first event outside of the Apex. He's been putting on a nice little win streak in the little box that we call the UFC Apex. Vicente Luque is, of course, the tried and true veteran. This is a great prospect veteran matchup. Do you think that Demogribo has what it takes as a prospect to get past a guy as crafty as Luque, or do you think that Luque will turn back Father Time and get another one in the win column?
I mean, I don't think he has it in him. I don't think that I just don't think he's looked the same. And I'm pretty confident that Garimbo gets it done. I think he'll probably drop Luque, finish with the ground and pound. And, Luque, not to undermine his skill set, he has serious power. And Garimbo has to be very defensively smart to win this. It should be close, but I feel like towards the later rounds, maybe 2 or 3, I see Garimbo probably getting a finish. I don't think Luque has looked the same for a while. I mean, we saw him in Atlantic City, and it was, you know how it went. So, yeah.
Yeah, look, I'm in agreement with you on this one. Greenwood's got slick striking, and the guy can hit, right? And Luque can too. Don't get me wrong. Luque has been in there with the best guys at welterweight for a decade, but he's not who he used to be. And I think the striking, even if the power is not the same, the technical striking of Greenwood is much higher than Joaquin Buckley's. And that's how Buckley won. Buckley won with the ground and pound. He won with his punching ability, and he made Luque, for lack of a better term, quit, which is you see happen, And there's no shame in that because you're fighting the best athletes in the world in a cage. There's no shame in quitting. But what I will say is that this is a guy that for a decade didn't quit. So I think we're going to see a similar Luque that we did in Atlantic City. We're going to see a very good Demba Greenbow. So I see Greenbow winning too. Now, with our final segment of the day, I told you it's going to be a quick one. We're running right through it. Under the radar, UFC 310. I want to talk about some fights that you might not know about that you should know about because these are really good fights. I hope you didn't hear that. That was my Outlook notification. Um, Under the radar, of course, one of our signature segments. I talk about some fights that you might not know about, some fights Luke should know about because he should have read his notes. But we'll give our takes on these ones and we'll sort of explain the lore a little bit. First off, Cody Durden, the number 14 flyweight in the world, is facing off against number 20 flyweight in the world, Joshua Van. Now, Joshua Van was seen as one of the hottest prospects in flyweight until a loss to Charles Johnson, who's now ranked 12th in the world. And Durden is a tried and true veteran, very strong wrestling. Joshua Van is very strong boxing. It's a great striker grappler matchup. Do you think Van has what it takes to finally crack the top 15?
I definitely think he does. I think that this is close though. Jordan could win with his wrestling, but if Van has good like takedown defense, he can pretty easily outstrike Durden and win with the TKO. Van is very elite on his feet, and I think that it'll be pretty light for him to outstrike him.
Look, I was rewatching the Matt Schnell fight. Cody Durden's last fight was a win against Matt Schnell, who's now retired. Um, and Schnell lost decisively. I mean, he got beat, but he touched Durden a little bit. He landed some shots on Durden. And Schnell had very high level boxing, very underrated boxing his entire career. But at the same time, Van is maybe the best boxer we've seen at flyweight since Brandon Moreno when he was coming up the rankings. So I really do find that Van is going to find Durden's chin. And if he finds Durden's chin, I think he's going to put him to sleep. So I do think that Joshua Van is going to win. Not only is he going to win, he's going to win by knockout. Our next under the radar fight, Randy Brown versus Brian Battle. This is the featured prelim, if I remember correctly. This is a great fight. I'm not even going to introduce it. I'm going to let Luke do all the talking for now because I'll let you carry it away, dude.
This is my most anticipated fight, probably on the card, with exception to maybe the co-main event. But I'm gonna ride with the slight underdog, which is crazy that Brown is an underdog. I really think that people are underestimating Randy Brown in this fight. He is so powerful, and he might be a little less well-rounded, but I think that his sheer power and striking ability is probably going to get this done. Now, part of me does want to see Battle win because of his, I want to see that post-fight interview. I love his character. I love what he's bringing to the UFC. I think he's an interesting guy, and Brazil, right? His last fight was in Brazil, right?
Last fight was in France. Brian
France.
Battle's last
What
fight
he
was
did in France to the France crowd, right?
Ken and
What he
Giuseppe,
did to the
yeah.
France crowd was it was amazing. I was confusing it Brazil with Colby Covington because there was such a similar speech.
Very similar.
Yeah, and so yeah, I think Randy Brown gets it done, but he is the underdog. But I'm gonna ride with him.
Here's the thing, you guys. I have been most of you at home, none of you at home, because we have a smaller audience right now. In 5 years, and this is the biggest podcast in mixed martial arts, so very few of you at home will be able to say this. I watched Brian Battle's first fight that was ever conducted with any affiliation of the UFC. I'll tell you why. The Ultimate Fighter, which nobody watches anymore, I watched. Brian Battle was picked last on that show. He was considered the worst prospect to make the cut, and he won the whole show. He beat Petrosky, submitted Petrosky, who's, by the way, still one of the best wrestling prospects in the division. He beat Trayshawn Gore, who I thought was going to win the season from the very start, who's a great fighter, just subbed out Chikoli. This guy was fighting killers since before he was in the UFC. And look, Brian Battle is so legitimate. I hate to see him fight a guy like Randy Brown because Randy Brown is so legit too. These guys are really good fighters, both of them. This is a great fight and has no business being on the prelims. Randy Brown is on a 4 fight win streak. His last, I mean, he knocked out Muslim Salikov. He's one of the best strikers we've seen at welterweight ever, and knocked him out cold. I've got Randy Brown here as the underdog. I'm going to pick him because he's more. He's. I know the variable. I know how good he is. If Brian Battle can beat Randy Brown though, he punches his ticket to a ranked win, right? He is the next guy at welterweight because he's already a huge fan favorite after the incredible performance we saw in France. Look, I'm a big fan of both these guys. I've had the pleasure of meeting Randy Brown now twice. He's a great guy. Brian Battle has been a guy that I've been paying attention to since before the UFC, and I've been supporting and following on Instagram since before he even had the Butcher nickname, right? That's how far back I go with this guy. I'm not, I'm going to pick Randy Brown to win, but look, here's the thing. Both these guys are so good. They're so high level. I think we'll see them later. The only reason why I'm picking Randy Brown over Brian Battle is not because Randy Brown got knocked out by Jack Della Maddalena, but because Brian Battle lost so dominantly, 30-26 to Henok Farkhadinov, who is a great wrestler. And I think Randy Brown's not going to wrestle him, but I think he can submit him. Because I remember when Randy Brown choked out Alex Oliveira with one arm. That was one of the first UFC fight cards I ever watched. This guy can submit people. And if he can submit Brian Battle, I think that's a decisive win. I think that's, if the fight doesn't go to a decision, I think it's the most likely path to victory without a knockout on either side.
I
So,
agree.
yeah.
And I feel
Long,
like if you
long
when you
explanation for
meet
no answer.
And I feel like when you meet a fighter, I don't know if anyone watching has ever met a fighter in person, but I've also I met Randy Brown with Aiden in Atlantic City, and there is a little bit of bias. Like even as I'm coming up with my predictions, like I always seem to ride with the person that I've met, and it hurts to sometimes watch this fight, but yeah, this time I think Brown gets it done.
Yeah, it's gonna be a hard fight to watch, but when
Yeah,
you have your
but this
favorite,
is another like banger that's on the
it's gonna
prelims.
be
I
an
know we
incredible
talked about
fight.
the
Yeah,
order.
it's gonna be fun, but it's gonna be kind of sad when someone
Yeah,
loses. I want both of them to win. I want a great, great, great draw. I want a really entertaining draw where they both fight guys that I don't like afterwards.
yeah,
That's what I want.
I agree.
Our next under the radar segment, Clay Guida is fighting Chase Hooper in a fight that just nobody predicted. Um, for context, Clay Guida was fighting people before Chase Hooper was born. But yet here they are locked in a cage against each other. Chase Hooper looked incredible in his last fight against Vilashov Borshev. We knew his jiu-jitsu was great, but his striking seemed to level up. But he's facing a guy that we know is great in Clay Guida, a guy that's been in there with the best guys in the world so consistently. Who do you got in this fight, and how do you got him?
Gita's been with the best guys in the world in this sport, but the fact is that he's old. He's slowing down, and I really think Hooper, especially based off his last fight, is really going to boss him around on the ground and get an early submission. It's simple as that. I don't think this is going to be a close fight. I think it's going to be very one-sided, and I didn't look at the odds, but I'm assuming Chase Hooper is a massive, massive favorite.
Huge favorite. I think Clay Guida's plus 600.
Yeah.
Yeah, and look, I think Guida deserves a hero send off. I mean, he does. He's such an icon of the sport. He's a Hall of Famer for not only the fights that he's put on. I remember the Diego Sanchez fight is one of the greatest ones I've ever seen. I was watching that in my chair, not knowing who's going to win, and I was like the Lego clip that you see on Instagram of the guy and zooms in. And he's that was me watching Clay Guida fight Diego Sanchez. So I am incredibly grateful for what Clay Guida has done for the sport. But I think that Chase Hooper is the future. I think it's bad matchmaking, to be honest. Clay Guida's wanted a pay-per-view card, and I think the reason why is he thinks he's gonna retire after, and it makes sense. He's almost 43 years of age. Chase Hooper's looked incredible. I think Chase Hooper's gonna win here. I think he's gonna win maybe even by knockout against the durable Guida. Um, I mean, Guida has lost by submission a lot recently, so I think that Guida needs to retire after this fight. But I'm gonna be sad to see him go, but excited to see what his future holds because he's, by all accounts, a great human being and a great fighter. Our final under the radar segment. This is on the main card, but I don't see many people talking about it. Nate Landwehr is fighting Doo Choi. And what is look, if any fight on this card is going to be an incredible fight, it's going to be this one. This is the fight that I think has the highest fight of the night potential out of every fight in the card. It's not the one I'm most excited for, but it's the one I think will be the best. What do you know? What do you know about these fighters, Luke? Can you give us a little context on who they are and what they've done, and tell us who you got?
Yeah, I can. And I really think that it's interesting. Like, this is another example of this card kind of being, I don't know if the UFC is like testing out something, but there's this weird organization. Like, I know they're on the main event. I'm pretty sure that they're implying that this is going to be a banger. You know, they're saying that we have high confidence that this fight is going to be a highlight reel moment, you know. And both these guys simply they're dogs. I mean, Nate Landwehr, he is a beast. This is going to be the most fun fight on the card. I think that UFC thinks it's a guaranteed finish. I think it's a guaranteed finish. It's close to a 50-50 fight. Defensively, I think Troy might slip up and get caught by Nate. But that's just my opinion. I think that it's super close, and both these guys are really explosive. We saw Nate in Atlantic City. He's fun to watch, and he's the train, right? Is that his nickname?
The Train, Nate the Train.
Yeah. So there you go. He's gonna bring the pressure. And I think he's gonna get it done. But then again, I'm not going to bet on this fight. I think that this fight is too. I think it's too like not like close, but it could very much go either way in the sense that these guys they seek a finish. You know.
Here's the thing, I actually almost disagree with you because I think Nate Landwehr as a slight favorite is kind of unfair to Nate Landwehr and what he's done recently. I mean, he beat guys like Jamal Emmers, who was legit a legitimate prospect. Duho Choi when he was on the come up was the next guy up. We were talking about him as a future featherweight champion. He's come on rough times, took a long layoff, got a win in his return. Um, if you haven't at home, watch this fight with Cub Swanson. It for my money the best 3 round fight we may have ever seen. It's free on YouTube. UFC posted it like last week, and I watched it again like the 100th time, and I was like, oh my goodness, it gets better every time I watch it. Um, but Duho Choi is a very good offensive fighter. He's a very bad defensive fighter. He gets hit a lot. And a guy like Nate Landwehr is also a very good offensive fighter, also a very bad defensive fighter. Nate Landwehr is quoted, this is a direct quote. I'm not going to curse on air, but he says, beat my behind and watch what happens. Because he will win every fight where you beat him up. Because he will just out heart you and he'll find a way. He'll find the shot. Duho Choi has not been able to do that. He has been knocked out. He has lost. Now, Duo Choi is a beautiful, beautiful fighter when he's offensive and he's on his game, and we could see that. We could see him win. I'm not saying he's not going to win. What I am saying is that I think Nate Landwehr at like minus 130 right now is kind of abysmal, given what Nate Landwehr has been able to do in the last 2 years. I don't think it's the same Nate Landwehr we saw 2 years ago when he was losing to Gilbert Burns and guys like that. This is a step up. This is a level up. This is the best Nate Landwehr we've ever seen. I think he'll beat Duho Choi probably by knockout after facing some early adversity. So with that, we had a very quick, very fun. We were on the ball today. I think last week we were kind of both a little asleep at the wheel. We're forgetting names and stuff. We were tapped in today.
We were dialed in.
We were dialed. We were ready for this, man. It's a little
Yeah,
late at night when we're recording this, but we were good, man.
we're good.
Episode. But stay tuned. At some point this week, probably this weekend, we'll have a video coming out about the greatest fighters of all time. And now Luke has seen my list. Luke, do you have any thoughts on my list without giving anything away?
So I actually have reserved viewing Aiden's list because I know that I was going to be in too much of a disagreement to even get on this podcast.
Okay.
So stay tuned for this. Stay tuned for this video. You're not going to want to miss it.
You're not. And I will make my case, and I'll say this as I go because I want Luke to think about this because the episode's almost over before I say my goodbyes. I will explain why I don't think John Jones is the greatest fighter of all time. Now, if you're excited to see that, tune in next week. I've been Aiden.
This is Luke. Take it easy, guys.
Take it easy. Enjoy yourselves.